Thank you for inviting us to come and give this talk. So my name's Bill Harris. I am a medical oncology registrar at the Christie Hospital. And I worked with Elena in the HPB and NET team at the Christie up until a few weeks ago.
And I'm Elena Vrana. I come from Greece. I'm a clinical research fellow in medical oncology, and especially in the HPB NET Department here at the Christie. I've been working at the Christie since November last year. So since my beginning, I was working along with Bill. And thank you once again for the invitation.
So you can see lots of letters after my name, which might look quite impressive, but probably is more a sign of a disorganized brain. I did a biology degree for the dissertation for which I studied howler monkeys in Brazil, and then decided cancer medicine was a better thing to spend my time doing. So did a PhD here at the Patterson attached to the Christie Hospital in Manchester about 10 years ago, and then retrained to do medicine because thought that was probably a better thing to do again after that. So yeah, not very good at choosing something and sticking to it really. But this talk essentially is about clinical research specifically and why it's important. So just a brief overview. We're going to talk about what a clinical trial is in the very basic sort of definition, the phases of clinical trials you may hear about in the news or read about trials, and some things mentioned that is a phase 2 trial or a phase 1/2 trial or a phase 3 trial, what all that means. We'll signpost some web tools where you can find recruiting trials in the sphere of neuroendocrine cancers, as well as looking at how expert patient advocates can influence and help in the design setup and indeed carrying out trials. We're then going to look at why patient participation matters, and then give a little case study of our experience of patients in the neuroendocrine clinic and link that into trials. So on a very, very simple level, a clinical trial is basically research that involves humans, involves people. And I think the most important thing to note about clinical trials is that those people volunteer to participate in clinical research. It's important to know that voluntary, that consent to take part in clinical trials is can be withdrawn at any point, and these trials only get off the ground, only lead to successful treatments because of that voluntary participation by patients. In simple terms, what we're trying to do is see if new treatments are, in the first instance, safe to deliver in humans, and number two, whether or not they're effective. Now, typically, that effective part is it effective in the constructs of the trial that it was designed to look at, but there are obviously examples of drugs that were looked at for a specific purpose and actually were found to be effective for other reasons. Viagra is the classic anecdote that was being developed as an anti-anginal medication and then was found to have unexpected other benefits. So ideally, in terms of trying to get new treatments established and available and funded through the NHS, these clinical trials need to be multi-centre, so lots of different centres within a country and also across different countries, recruiting large numbers of patients in order to change clinical practice. And typically that's to improve patient outcomes, obviously. Usually that primary aim in terms of patient outcome is improved survival, progression-free survival, overall survival, these sorts of terms. But I guess the important thing to always remember with clinical trials and research and any new treatments is that it's important that any additional survival benefit doesn't come at the expense of quality of life and doesn't come with toxicities that take away rather than just giving in terms of extra time, that doesn't diminish the quality of life for those taking part. And really that's why patient participation is such a vital part of clinical trial design. So I'm now just going to go through the basic phases of clinical trials. So typically, new treatments, drug design starts in the preclinical setting. So this is the PhD that I did some 10 years ago. This is the sort of things that I was doing. Bench research is known as, pipettes, centrifuges, petri dishes, all of that kind of thing, looking at things at the molecular and cellular levels. If results are promising, you then move up to animal models, which unfortunately is still a big part of that preclinical research, modeling human disease in rodents typically. And at that point, if results continue to be promising and a new treatment looks like it may have, in our case, anti-cancer efficacy, we move into phase 1 trials. So at the Christie, we have a team called the ECMT team, the Experimental Cancer Medicine team. So it's a team of over 100 people that essentially exclusively look at phase 1 clinical trials. So these are early trials. The main outcome in these phase 1 trials is to look at safety information, really. So we're looking at, we want to know that the drug is having a benefit, and obviously patients that are volunteering to be recruited to these trials want a clinical benefit, but the primary outcomes are, what is it safe to give and what are safe doses for these drugs. We also want to look at things called pharmacodynamics, which is what impact the drug has within the body, and also pharmacokinetics, which is what impact your body has on a drug when it's taken on board. Because of the slightly unknown nature of phase 1 trials, recruitment is typically low, often less than 50 people. And in fact, for a particular combination or a specific dose of a drug, sometimes only 3 people internationally are in a particular arm of treatment in a phase 1 trial. Phase 1 trial is published and shows benefits, then moves on to, perhaps unsurprisingly, phase 2, which is now where the outcomes are more about how effective the efficacy of that novel treatment. What is the best dose and what degree of response do we see? So in a neuroendocrine tumor or any cancer trial, that degree of response is, has it halted growth of the cancer, or ideally, has it shrunk, and by how much has it shrunk disease? Typically in a phase 2 trial, it won't be a comparison study, so you won't be against SOC. Sorry, it isn't a SOC as in something you'd wear on your foot. It's a standard of care treatment. So the sort of the what's established as chemotherapy or the first line treatment already. This type of comparison isn't made in a phase 2 trial. That comes later. Similarly, it's not compared against a placebo. You don't typically get placebo trials in cancer medicine for the obvious reason that we don't really have the time or space to give people sugar pills when this is such an important thing that we're trying to find an answer to. Recruitment is typically larger, so up to around 300 patients on a phase 2 trial. And then if that shows efficacy, we move into what's known as phase 3, intuitively. And this is typically where there is a comparison. So we're looking at, in cancer studies, comparison to standard of care treatments to show, is this new treatment better? Or sometimes we're looking for something called non-inferiority, which just means, is it cheaper to make? Is it easier to deliver? So is it a tablet instead of an intravenous drug? Does it have less toxicity or side effects? And it's at this point where we are typically looking for health authority approval if there is benefit at the phase 3 level. Typically recruitment is much, much larger. And then there are phase 4 trials. So this is typically once funding has already been approved, so through NICE, or so it's available on the NHS. And these phase 4 studies are essentially looking at the longer term assessments. So 5-year overall survivals, also looking at late effects, toxicity and side effects that come on later on. And typically recruitment is into the thousands for these studies. So I just wanted to change things up a little bit and just sort of signpost you to some places where you can look for trials that may be recruiting within the neuroendocrine sphere. So I guess the one that we typically use as clinicians is the government-based search engine, which is clinicaltrials.gov. Anyone can have access to this, and you can put in as much or as little information about type of cancer, the locations for trial centres, and it will come up with those that are active or actively recruiting. But there are some that are more specific. So on the Neuroendocrine Cancer UK website itself, there are several different areas where you can look for trials that are recruiting. So there's one called RareCan, which is looking at rare cancers, as you might imagine from the name. And essentially you fill in a form, and then someone comes back to you and discusses what trials may be available, produces a bespoke report, which you can then take to your clinician to discuss about potential recruitment. Some others are Ankara, which is an artificial intelligence generated search engine, essentially looking for potential trials, and ClinicalNet, which is broadly similar to the clinicaltrials.gov search engine, but more specifically looking at NET trials. On the UK iNet website, there's a list of recruiting trials. I had a look today actually, and very recently there's a PowerPoint presentation that's gone up by one of the doctors that's affiliated with this website that just summarizes the current trials for the UK and Ireland in the sphere of NET, and breaks them down into the sort of mechanisms of action of the drug. So that's quite useful. And that's on this link here, the current clinical trials page on that website. Okay, so this, I apologise in advance, is a bit of a wordy slide, and it's also based on a big study that I know often gets referenced, largely because it is the kind of the biggest, I guess, most important study that's been published in terms of how patient influence can improve clinical trial design. The references at the bottom there. It's the Geisler et al. From 2017. But essentially, it breaks it down, this sort of roadmap as to where patient influence can help improve trials from before the study is even being designed, just those considerations in the first instance, having patients involved to find where those unmet needs are. So again, with more of a introspection on quality of life and where those patient relevant values and outcomes are. And then in terms of actual design and planning of the trial, having patients on board during the design aspect is important for logistical things. So things like consideration of travel expenses, what support there is for other family members or carers, anyone who's got mobility issues. Those things I appreciate should be a given, but sometimes you need that expert patient voice to make sure that those kind of issues are advocated for. Specifically in terms of insight into the protocol design, having patients involved in that process allows us to best come up with quality of life measures and how we can capture those in the clinic, and with questionnaires in between clinical assessments in hospital. And it also helps with things like data protection and ethical issues, having patients involved at that point. And also in terms of the patient information sheets within the study design and planning part, having patients on board, giving us insight into how well those patient information sheets are written, the readability, how they're designed, how the information is laid out, how complex information is conveyed in a simple way, what languages they should be translated into, where those information sheets should be disseminated, within expert patient groups, those sorts of things. It's important to have that patient input. And then in terms of conducting research, you may be aware that as trials progress, often amendments are needed, things that are unforeseen. The trial needs to be changed whilst it's active. Similar to the point before, having patients involved in being able to convey that message and where best that information is conveyed is really important, particularly when it's safety information. And investigator meetings, often across multiple countries, they're often online, but having a patient voice in those meetings is also really important. It can often help to highlight why there's a problem, say if recruitment is slow, if patients are dropping out, if there is a problem with compliance, say, if it's a tablet treatment at the right time or coming in fasted for treatments, if that needs to be the case, if that information isn't being conveyed properly, having that patient voice in those investigator meetings is really important. And then after a trial is wrapped up and the results are being sort of disseminated and published, again, having lay summaries and having a clear voice and knowledge as to where those things need to be shown and how that information needs to be conveyed is only going to optimize, patient involvement in novel treatments. Okay, I'm pretty sure I've flapped my gums for long enough, so I'll pass you over to Elena, and I'll take any questions after she's finished.
Thank you very much, Bill. Well, moving on to the next slide, I want to emphasize, apart from what has already been said regarding the necessity for further engagement and involvement of patients in the design of clinical trials, I want to emphasize the main contribution of patients in clinical trials, which is their active participation, their enrollment in clinical trials. Many clinical trials encounter substantial hurdles that hinder their success, and the most important, the most crucial among them is poor patient recruitment to trials. Because this can lead to the lack of representative samples, which is something especially critical in the context of rare diseases, where the limited patient population highlights the necessity for designing highly personalized studies and maintaining continuous engagement with patients and their families. And of course, it can cause low rates of trial completion. This can impede the advancement of clinical research and ultimately affect patient outcomes negatively. There was a study published in 2014 that compared the survival among cancer patients. And this study actually showed that there was a survival benefit in participants in clinical trials compared to patients treated outside of a clinical trial in the first year after diagnosis. So patients' participation matters for the participants themselves, who they can benefit from access to new promising treatments that are not available outside of the setting of a clinical trial, from close monitoring, advice, and care by research team. Given that study implementation requires an approval by an ethics committee, requires oversight with regards to compliance to a study protocol, and involves the support of an extra research staff in the monitoring of care, it is likely that this surveillance and extra healthcare will result in the accrual of benefits for the patients treated within the setting of a clinical trial, regardless of the study arm allocation. So, and you can imagine that with this close monitoring, we would expect a greater understanding of patients' condition. Furthermore, trial investigators are usually opinion leaders with access to new drugs and devices and frequently adhere to the most up-to-date optimal medical treatment guidelines. And last but not least, it has been suggested that participants in clinical trials can benefit from the so-called Hawthorne effect. This term refers to the tendency of some people to work harder and perform better when they are participating in a clinical trial. It is the inclination of people who are the subjects of a study, of a trial, to change or improve the behavior being evaluated just because it is being studied and not because of changes in study parameters and stimulus. Eligible patients participate in clinical trials in the hope that in addition to the benefit that they will have in terms of their health, their participation will also assist future patients and will improve healthcare in future patients. So in this way, with their participation, they help society and future patients, and they contribute to the enhancement of scientific knowledge. So moving on to what we do at the Christie, which is a center of excellence for neuroendocrine tumors, I would like to share with you some of our clinical trials. We have a considerable portfolio of clinical trials. At present, only one is open and recruiting. This is a Pelican trial, which is a study of carboplatin etoposide chemotherapy in combination with pembrolizumab and lenvatinib maintenance treatment in patients with advanced high-grade neuroendocrine tumors. Pembrolizumab is an immunotherapy, and lenvatinib is a multiple kinase inhibitor, which comes in terms of in forms of capsules that patients take at home. And this is, like I've mentioned, for high-grade neuroendocrine tumors. We have some trials in follow-up. The NETAP is a study of the use of a mobile technology, of a mobile device technology to collect patients' reported symptoms during medical and surgical treatment for neuroendocrine tumors. And I feel that this study comprises a step towards the previously mentioned patient and population involvement approach, as its main aim is to collect patients' feedback. COMPETE trial is a phase 3 trial to evaluate the efficacy and safety of PRRT, peptide receptor radionuclide therapy, with lutetium edotraeotide in comparison with everolimus in patients with inoperable progressive somatostatin receptor positive gastroenteropancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. And some of its results has already been published in the recent ENET conference. This trial actually achieved to show survival, a benefit in terms of progression-free survival for patients receiving PRRT compared to patients receiving everolimus. Actually, the median progression-free survival, the median time until a progression of the disease is visible in scan was 23.9 months with PRRT compared to 14.1 months with everolimus. And surufatinib in NET is a phase 2 study of surufatinib in well-differentiated grade 1 and grade 2 neuroendocrine tumors. The two phase 3 trials with surufatinib that took place in China were published and unfortunately were negative. So we don't actually expect a positive result from that as well. And we have some trials in setup that we open, and we hope that they will open anytime soon. And I would also like to share with you a case treated, a patient treated at the Christie with an exceptional response to treatment received within the setting of a clinical trial. This young lady was referred to our center in 2010 when she was 38 years old. She was diagnosed with a metastatic small bowel, well-differentiated grade 1 neuroendocrine tumor with concurrent liver and mental metastases, with Ki67 of below 2%. For those who are not familiar with Ki67, this is a proliferating index that is usually reported in pathology reviews in different cancer types, but is essential in neuroendocrine tumors in order to stratify them in grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. So this lady started first-line treatment. Bill, I think I will need your help now because, yeah, I started first-line treatment in November 2010, and I think that you have the wrong presentation where there are some derangements in the design, but anyway, we'll get through that. She started first-line treatment in November 2010 with octreotide 20 milligrams every 4 weeks. The usual dose of octreotide is 30 milligrams, but based on the report that we received from the center that the patient started the treatment, they selected this dose in fear of side effects from the treatment, and we kept that dose for our patient. So after 6 months on this first-line treatment with octreotide, there was an addition of interferon A in her medication in view of the possible cytotoxic effect that this drug could have. To be honest, interferon A is sparingly used in the management of neuroendocrine tumors, and it is a drug that was used mostly in previous decades in different cancer types, and it is not used due to the toxicity and the perceived limited efficacy. And actually, our patient developed a lot of side effects from interferon A, like fatigue, early satiety, decreased appetite, nausea, abdominal cramps, achy joints, flu-like symptoms. But despite all of these side effects, she managed to continue with this combination of treatments for 3 years, when in May 2014 she progressed. At that point, there was a clinical trial at the Christie that was assessing the use of PRRT, peptide receptor radionuclide therapy, along with somatostatin analog in patients with progressive mid-gut neuroendocrine tumor. And the patient was eligible for that study, and she enrolled in the study, and she received 4 cycles of PRRT along with the octreotide injections between June and November 2014. She did have some side effects from PRRT. They were more or less the same as previously, but they were more intense. She struggled mostly with fatigue and nausea, and the management of the nausea improved as the physicians, the investigators in the trial, became more familiar with the management of amino acid infusion around the time of PRRT, and became more familiar with the appropriate anti-sickness medication pre, during, and post-PRRT. So she managed again to complete the whole second-line treatment, and actually in July 2015, she had achieved a partial response, the best radiological response that she ever had, with a 33% reduction of the total burden of the disease. And the impressive thing is that her disease is stable up until now, well, at least up until our last follow-up in September 2024. We're expecting her back in clinic soon, but she has been on surveillance with imaging and on octreotide injections for more than 10 years now, which is very impressive if we consider that the median progression-free survival with PRRT, in NETTER-1 trial was around 28 months, in COMPETE trial was around 23.9 months, so it is around 2 years. So she's with stable disease for more than 10 years, which is very impressive. And this is a benefit that patient can have usually when they try new drugs, new medications within the setting of a clinical trial. And yeah. So in conclusion, if we want to achieve better outcomes for our patients, well-crafted study designs that address patient needs are required, as well as sufficient engagement with patients regarding feedback and experience throughout the research process. Such input is essential for enhancing patient safety and mitigating side effects. The substantial patient participation in clinical trials is indispensable. In this, we need patients' contribution in the trial development process, from the formation of research questions to the effective dissemination of findings, because this may help staff build trusting relationships with potential participants and may foster mutual commitment. So the patient and public involvement approach is a necessity. I would like to close this talk with a quote from C.S. Lewis. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And we are in the era of changes. Thank you very much.